What's up guys, today we're talking how fast you can drive in four-wheel drive, when it's acceptable to drive fast in four-wheel drive, how to assess the situation, the driving dynamics of a vehicle, your safety and a whole bunch more. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel guys. If you're new here we discuss all the fundamentals about four-wheel drive, off-roading and overlanding. If it's something you're into, you would like to learn more about the subject, you know what to do. So without any further ado, how fast can you actually drive in four-wheel drive? So first and foremost, before we even engage four-wheel drive mode, you need to make sure that the surface you're traveling on is slippery enough. It's a low traction surface. Otherwise, there's always the risk of drivetrain binding. And drivetrain binding is when you drive a part-time four-wheel drive in 4H or in four-wheel drive mode on a high traction surface. That means there's not enough slippage on the wheels, which is necessary for the drivetrain to function properly. There's not enough slippage on the wheels, and then potential energy gets built up in your drivetrain system. That will result in all sorts of catastrophic damage, from tire damage to your drivetrain components and right up into your transmission and your transfer case. So always make sure that the surface you're driving on is slippery enough. So what type of surface warrants engaging four-wheel drive? Well, muddy tracks, sand, dirt roads, gravel roads, even highway roads that are full of snow and ice. These are all low traction slippery surfaces where you're quite safe to engage for high. Now there will be certain scenarios where the dirt road perhaps is wide enough and the visibility is clear for tens or maybe even more kilometers or miles. In this instance you might feel inclined to drive a little bit faster, but or should you? Well, there's always going to be that risk of tire bursts, uneven bends in the road. There could be ditches or holes in the road that is camouflaged with leaves or snow that we should be aware of, and these are all dangerous scenarios that could cause us to make an accident. So when driving off-road in any one of these scenarios, you always want to ask yourself, will you have enough time to slow down or stop the vehicle or avoid an obstacle or an animal running across the road? You as the driver should always assess the situation, always think ahead. So what is the actual maximum speed you can drive in four-wheel drive? Well, the first thing you should always do is consult your owner's manual. The owner's manual will be very specific as to how fast you should drive in four-wheel drive high and four-wheel drive low range. But the general rule is usually try not to exceed 55 miles per hour. So how does driving fast in four-wheel drive affect cornering? Well, when driving on a low traction surface in four-wheel drive, you want to avoid aggressive braking and sudden jerky motions on the steering wheel, because you will then obviously lose traction. But because these vehicles are also top heavy, their weight is easily shifted because we're carrying all our gear, we've got rooftop tents, there's fuel, water, etc. The vehicle is also quite high off the ground, so it's got a high center of gravity. So plus with the very compliant suspension, it makes it easy for the vehicle to actually topple over if not driven correctly. So you rather want to practice progressive braking, which means from a further back distance you start applying slower pressure, lighter pressure, and then increase it gradually. You also want to try and avoid as best as possible to brake in a bend. So as best as possible, try and keep your steering motion nice and smooth and controlled, and avoid sudden jerky motions for best control of your vehicle. How is handling affected when driving on a low traction surface with your four-wheel drive? Well, for starters, the steering is not going to be crisp and direct. You're going to get massive understeer. In general, four-wheel drive steering isn't really that crisp to begin with. So when driving off-road, that driving dynamic is actually exaggerated. And if you feel the vehicle isn't responding while turning, it could mean that traction has been lost, and that's why you'll get that major understeer. Four-wheel drive is not driven responsibly or by an inexperienced driver. An accident is very likely to happen. To recap, avoid jerky motions on the steering, avoid aggressive braking, practice progressive braking, which means braking from a further distance, always use slow, controlled, smooth steering motions, and then also easier throttle pressure. These are all safe driving practices when you are venturing off-road with your vehicle. So how does driving in four-wheel drive affect your braking? Well, when you're driving on a low traction, slippery surface, you must bear in mind that your braking distance is drastically increased. So you not only want to make sure you are in four-wheel drive mode, but you also want to adjust your driving style to compensate for that increased braking distance. So a lot of four-wheel drivers make the mistake that when they engage four-wheel drive, they sort of feel a bit invincible, you know, and they don't adjust their driving style accordingly. And yeah, sure, these vehicles, they're sure-footed, they give you a sense of confidence, but you always need to remember the laws of physics still apply, and once traction is lost, it's lost. So you need to adjust your driving style. That's of vital importance to make up or compensate for this extended stopping time. So the three elements that make up braking distance is your reaction time, traction, and your stopping time. So you need to always be aware of that, and you need to make sure that you compensate your driving for that. And remember that when driving on a low traction surface like snow, ice, sand, dirt roads, whatever, that your stopping distance is increased by up to double. So as a four-wheel drive owner, it's important to know when to engage four-wheel drive and how fast to actually drive a vehicle on challenging terrain. That's very important to prevent damage to both your vehicle, your wallet, and your ego. So if possible, avoid exceeding 55 to 60 miles per hour on challenging terrain. And remember, the vehicle's dynamics is very different on a low traction surface, so always adjust your driving style accordingly. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned one or two things, and until next time, cheers.